Joni Lamb has just exploded in fury over Laura Lynn's shocking bombshell. The air is thick with tension as Joni reacts to the bombshell revelation, demanding it be deleted immediately. The drama is heating up, and nothing is off limits. What did Laura Lynn say that has Joni this furious? You won't believe the explosive truth that's about to unravel. Trust us, you won't want to miss this confrontation. Delete it now, or regret it later. What started as just another routine interview quickly spiraled into something much bigger. It was meant to be a calm, straightforward conversation. Just two people sitting down, discussing some issues that didn't seem to be all that controversial at first. Laura Lynn, known for her sharp questions and calm demeanor, had her guest across from her. The interview was low-key, no fancy graphics, no wild headlines, just a simple talk. But from the very start, something felt off. The guest spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word was carefully chosen, as if there was more beneath the surface than they were letting on. As the conversation unfolded, the tone shifted. They began to discuss missing documents, delays that didn't make sense, and unanswered questions that hung in the air. It wasn't loud or emotional, but the way the guest spoke made people pause. The more they listened, the more they started to notice small inconsistencies, things that didn't quite add up. These weren't wild accusations, just quiet observations. But sometimes, it's those quiet voices, the ones that aren't trying to make a scene, that have the most impact. At first, only a small group of people caught on. They replayed the video, noticed the dates didn't line up, and saw how certain details didn't match the story they had always been told. It was subtle, but those small gaps began to stand out. And, once you noticed them, it became harder to ignore. More and more people shared the interview, not because it was promoted or advertised, but because it raised so many questions. Whispers grew into a buzz, and before long the video had spread beyond its original viewers. Despite the lack of shouting or emotional outbursts, something about the interview felt different. There was an air of quiet urgency. As the video gained traction, the questions began to pile up. Viewers shared it privately, asking their friends and family if they'd seen it. Church groups were talking about it. It wasn't just the content that was spreading, it was the curiosity surrounding it. The video became more than just content. It became a spark, one that ignited a conversation that couldn't easily be put out. Joni Lamb, who initially thought the interview would be just another online controversy that would fade away, quickly realized this was different. The more she heard about it, the more unsettled she became. People weren't just watching the video, they were discussing it, sharing it, and asking questions that cut too close to the heart of her ministry. The video wasn't just making waves, it was starting to feel like a tidal wave that could destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. The more Joni tried to dismiss it, the more it grew. What had begun as a quiet interview had turned into a full-blown controversy, one that seemed to grow stronger the more people tried to ignore it. What had started as a single conversation was now a viral topic, one that threatened to pull apart everything. What was it in that interview that had so many people talking? Why did it feel like something was being hidden? The questions kept coming, and with each new question, the controversy continued to grow. When Joni Lamb first heard about the interview, she thought it would just be another passing moment in the endless stream of content online, something that would fade away in a few days, maybe even hours. After all, it was just another video on the internet, another interview, one of many that came and went without making a ripple. But soon enough, it became clear that this interview was different. At first, it was just small whispers among people she knew, people in her circle, staff members, acquaintances, each one quietly bringing it up to her. They'd send her links asking, "Have you seen this interview?" Joni, trying to keep her composure, told herself it wasn't worth worrying about. It was just a fleeting moment of online chatter. It would pass. After all, she had dealt with her fair share of controversies in the past. Nothing ever stuck, right? So why would this be any different? But the more Joni heard about the video, the more unsettled she became. The interview wasn't going away. It was spreading like wildfire. People weren't just watching it and moving on. They were talking about it, sharing it, dissecting it, and asking questions. Questions that cut too close to the heart of everything Joni had worked so hard to build. The more she heard about it, the more she realized that this time, it wasn't like the other times. This video was different. The question wasn't just about the contents of the interview. It was about what it implied. It was about trust, authority, and the foundation of the ministry she and Marcus had built over the years. Joni had always prided herself on being a strong leader, someone who could be trusted to protect her family, her ministry, and the people who followed her. But now, this interview was threatening all of that. The thought of something this big, this challenging to her authority, spreading unchecked, made her uneasy. She knew she had to act quickly before the situation grew even worse. So, Joni did what she always did when faced with a crisis. She took charge. The video was no longer just an online nuisance. It was a threat to everything she stood for. She couldn't let it fester. She needed to silence it, erase it, and make sure it was forgotten. That was her first instinct. She picked up the phone within hours, calling advisors, lawyers, and tech teams. Her instructions were clear and firm. Get this video off the internet. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but Joni was used to fighting battles, especially ones that were about protecting her legacy. She filed complaints with platforms, demanded takedowns, and reached out to anyone who might be able to help. She wasn't asking for the video to be removed, she was commanding that it be removed. To Joni, there was no room for negotiation. It had to go, and it had to go now. Behind the scenes, the mood inside her ministry began to shift. Staff members scrambled to help Joni, trying to figure out how to execute her plan. Emergency meetings were held, statements were drafted and rewritten over and over again. There was a sense of urgency in the air. Everyone knew that the situation needed to be dealt with quickly, but some were beginning to feel uneasy. Would pushing so hard to erase the interview only make things worse? And over and over and over, interview after interview, only make things worse? Would it turn into something bigger than they could handle? Joni didn't care. To her, it was simple. The longer the video stayed online, the more dangerous it became. As she pushed forward with her plan to erase the video, Joni was relentless. Every time the video was taken down, it seemed like another copy popped up somewhere else. Screenshots of the interview were shared, and new versions of the video appeared on other platforms. The more she tried to remove it, the more people seemed determined to keep it circulating. With every attempt to control the narrative, the story only spread further. People began to ask, why is this being hidden? What is so dangerous about this interview? The effort to silence it had only made people more curious, and now, the video was no longer just an interview. It was a symbol of something much bigger. Joni, however, refused to back down. She doubled down on her belief that the video was reckless and misleading. She framed her response as a matter of protection. She wasn't trying to cover up the truth, she insisted. She was trying to protect the people and the ministry she loved from harm. The interview was full of unverified claims, and giving those claims a platform could do serious damage to the people involved. To Joni, this wasn't about controlling information for her own gain. It was about shielding everyone from unnecessary harm. For those close to Joni, her actions made sense. She was doing what any leader would do, protecting her family and the reputation of her ministry. They agreed that sometimes tough decisions had to be made, even if it upset people. After all, leadership wasn't about popularity. It was about making hard calls to protect what mattered. But to others, Joni's actions were hard to understand. It looked like censorship, a deliberate attempt to hide the truth. The more Joni pushed, the more the video spread, and with each repost, the narrative began to change. People who had never heard of Joni or the interview before were now drawn into the controversy, asking the same questions. Why was this being hidden? What was at stake? Joni didn't care what people outside her circle thought. She had a mission, and that mission was clear: remove the video and protect her legacy at all costs. But the harder she pushed, the more people began to question her motives. The video, once just a small piece of online content, was now a symbol of something larger, a symbol of the struggle between authority and transparency. The more Joni tried to erase it, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about a video anymore. It was about who got to decide what the public could see and hear. And for many, that was a question too important to ignore. Joni's response, as calculated and decisive as it was, had consequences. The more she fought to remove the video, the more the public became fascinated by it. People began to rally behind Laura Lynn, seeing her as a symbol of transparency, while others saw Joni as someone trying to hide something. As time went on, the debate grew larger, more divisive. Joni's efforts to control the narrative only made it harder to keep that control. The video had become a force of its own, and Joni's fight to silence it only made the situation worse. The deeper Joni dug in, the harder it became to escape the consequences. Each move she made was scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by those on both sides of the issue. The struggle for control over the narrative had become its own story, one that had spread far beyond the original interview. And in the end, it was clear. Joni's response, no matter how powerful, couldn't stop the video from being part of the conversation forever. The controversy surrounding the interview with Laura Lynn had quickly spiraled out of control, and the impact it had on the public was undeniable. What had started as just another video online had grown into a full-blown public division, one that cut through communities, families, and even entire churches. People were no longer simply debating the contents of the interview itself. They were questioning the very nature of truth, authority, and transparency. At the heart of the division was the fierce clash between two groups: those who supported Laura Lynn and saw her as a truth-teller, and those who stood behind Joni Lamb, believing she was simply trying to protect her family, her ministry, and the reputation of everything she had worked to build. The sides were drawn, and each side became more entrenched in their beliefs as the controversy wore on. What had started as an innocent, even quiet interview was now the flashpoint for a cultural battle over trust, control, and freedom of speech. For Laura's supporters, the interview was a revelation. She didn't shout or exaggerate. She simply asked questions, and in those questions, she gave a platform to truths that some believed had been buried for too long. Laura's calm demeanor and her patient approach gave her credibility. To her audience, this wasn't about stirring the pot for the sake of drama. It was about uncovering something important, something people deserved to know. She had become a symbol of transparency in an age where information was so often controlled. By simply allowing her guests to speak, by not over-sensationalizing the interview, Laura came across as someone brave enough to shine a light in dark corners where others had been too afraid to look. To her supporters, Laura's refusal to back down was a testament to her integrity. She wasn't backing away from uncomfortable truths or trying to silence voices that needed to be heard. She became, in their eyes, a beacon of courage, someone who stood up for what was right even when the stakes were high. As the video spread, so did her influence. People from all walks of life, many of whom had never heard of Laura before, found themselves following her, listening to her interviews, and praising her for her commitment to truth. But as Laura's platform grew, so did the backlash. Joni Lamb's supporters saw things very differently. To them, Laura's interview wasn't bravery, it was irresponsibility. They believed that Laura had given a platform to unverified claims and rumors, that the interview was full of misleading statements, and that by airing it, she had done more harm than good. For them, this wasn't about transparency, it was about respect. They saw Joni as a leader who had worked tirelessly to build something valuable, and they felt that her reputation, her family, and her ministry were being unfairly attacked. Joni's supporters believed that the interview didn't offer truth, it offered chaos. They feared that letting such an interview circulate unchecked would lead to misunderstandings, damage the reputation of innocent people, and cause unnecessary division. To them, Joni's decision to demand the video's removal was a natural and necessary response to protect the integrity of her work. They saw her as someone who was looking out for the people she cared about, someone who knew that sometimes the truth could be dangerous if it wasn't presented carefully. Joni's leadership, they believed, was about more than just managing information. It was about making tough decisions that would preserve the unity and peace within their community. As the divide grew, it was no longer just about the interview. It became a larger question of leadership and accountability. The public began to ask, who had the right to decide what was true? Should a leader be allowed to control the narrative, or should transparency and honesty always come first, no matter the cost? Was it Joni's duty to protect her family, or was it more important to allow uncomfortable truths to come to light, even if it meant tearing down what had been built? The tension wasn't just online. It spilled over into families, neighborhoods, and churches. People found themselves torn between two opposing views, and often those divisions were personal. In some households, one spouse defended Joni while the other sided with Laura. It became more than a debate. It became a line that divided loved ones. People who had once shared common ground found themselves at odds, unable to understand how the other could see things so differently. Churches too were affected by the division. Congregations that had once been united found themselves splintering into camps. Some pastors defended Joni, preaching loyalty to her leadership, while others questioned whether she had the right to silence the interview. Some churchgoers saw Laura as a hero, a voice of reason in a world filled with censorship, while others felt that Laura's actions had brought unnecessary turmoil into their faith communities. The tension was palpable. Where there had once been harmony, there was now friction. The media played its part in escalating the situation. What had started as a small story within Christian circles had exploded into something much larger. and secular outlets that would normally ignore the ins and outs of religious media now picked up the story with fervor. Headlines painted the situation as a battle of censorship versus transparency. News outlets dissected Joni's actions, analyzing every word she said in her attempts to remove the interview. Talk shows debated whether her push to erase the video was a misuse of power or a necessary protective measure for her ministry. In the public eye, Joni's efforts to control the situation were being seen as a battle for control over truth itself, and this only fueled the fire. As the controversy continued, the questions grew louder. What exactly was so dangerous about this interview? Why was it so important to remove it? If the claims were false, why not just let them be exposed for what they were? The attempt to silence the video became, in many eyes, proof that there was something being hidden. People began to suspect that Joni's push to erase the interview wasn't about protecting people, it was about protecting herself, her family, and the narrative she had worked so hard to craft. On the other side, Laura's supporters saw her refusal to apologize as proof of her strength. She had given her guest a platform and had allowed the truth, whatever it might be, to come out. For them, this was a victory, not just for Laura, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by those in power. The more Joni pushed to remove the video, the more it fueled Laura's supporters' belief that they were right, that the truth was always worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The public division over the video grew deeper. What had started as a simple disagreement about an interview had turned into a larger cultural debate about trust, authority, and transparency. People were questioning the integrity of those in power, whether in media, religion, or politics, and the interview became a symbol of that struggle. It was no longer just about a video. It was about who controlled the truth, who had the right to decide what the public could see, and how much power leaders should have over the narratives that shaped people's beliefs. As the days turned into weeks, the tension only grew. The divide between Laura's supporters and Joni's supporters became more entrenched, and each side believed they had the moral high ground. Families fought, communities fractured, and what had started as a single interview became the heart of a larger cultural battle. People weren't just fighting over one video, they were fighting for something bigger: the right to know the truth, the right to control their own narratives, and the right to trust their leaders. The controversy had become a battle for the soul of public discourse itself, and the questions it raised would not be answered easily. The fallout from the interview didn't just vanish after the initial wave of controversy. In fact, its impact lingered, slowly shaping the way people viewed Joni Lamb, Laura Lynn, and the institutions they represented. What started as a simple disagreement about a video had become a much bigger issue, one that affected not only those directly involved, but the wider community as well. The tension between transparency and control, authority and accountability, was now something everyone had to reckon with. For Joni, the consequences were immediate and personal. Her reputation, carefully built over years of hard work, was now under intense scrutiny. The fallout from her decision to demand the video's removal was far-reaching. The ministry she had spent so much time nurturing began to feel the strain. Viewers who had once trusted her and her leadership now found themselves questioning her actions. People began to wonder if there was more to the story than they had been told. Even her supporters, who had once stood by her without question, began to feel uneasy. It was one thing to protect the family's reputation, but it was another to appear to be silencing the truth. That unease didn't go away quickly. The trust that had been built over the years was now fragile, and the ministry could never be quite the same again. For Laura Lynn, the long-term impact was both an opportunity and a burden. As the controversy unfolded, her platform grew. She gained new followers who admired her for standing firm in the face of such backlash. She was seen as a defender of truth, a person who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. But with that increased visibility came new pressures. People looked to her not just for entertainment or information, but for answers. She was now a symbol of transparency, someone who had refused to back down when the powerful tried to silence her. While this elevated her profile, it also placed her under the microscope. Critics, particularly those loyal to Joni, began to target her more viciously. The attacks were personal, questioning her motives and accusing her of stirring unnecessary controversy. Despite this, Laura continued to stand her ground, but the weight of being the face of such a public conflict began to take its toll. The ripple effect of the interview didn't stop at Joni and Laura. It extended to the wider community, particularly in churches and religious organizations that had long trusted the ministries that Joni represented. The interview, and Joni's reaction to it, became a cultural flashpoint. It sparked discussions about leadership, trust, and what people were willing to accept from those in positions of power. It made many realize how little they knew about the true inner workings of the institutions they had supported. The conversation wasn't just about this one video anymore. It was about the broader issue of transparency in the church and the media. The more the interview circulated, the more it raised uncomfortable questions. Was the public really being told the whole truth? Could they trust the people they looked up to? The fallout from the interview forced many to rethink the way they viewed authority and the role of media in shaping public opinion. The controversy opened a door that couldn't easily be closed, and people began to see the cracks in the carefully constructed narratives that had been presented to them. It wasn't just about this interview anymore. It was about a shift in how society views the balance between transparency, truth, and the control of information. As the months went on, the long-term cultural impact became undeniable. The interview and its aftermath left a mark on how people would approach authority, trust, and information in the future. It was a lesson in how quickly public perception could change, and how easily the truth could slip through the cracks when people tried too hard to control it. Even though the interview itself might eventually be forgotten, the lessons it taught would continue to shape conversations for years to come.